restoring classic 911s, there's a common theme with cars that come to me, is that they change from their original spec from when they were made. And that is due to fashion. It's due to people trying to update the car to make it look like a current 911. This car came with elephant mirrors on it, which were the later SC.
Well, that's how
mirrors.
you got it. You got it with elephant.
That's how so someone put those on it. So the car came to me in a very different appearance to what it looks like now. The wheels had changed, the mirrors were changed, the interior was changed from the colour it is now to a black. So it was muted, more to the taste of probably the late 80s.
It was conservative, and I think
it was made more conservative looking.
It's a bit like, it's in exactly the same way that every Ferrari that left the factory in metallic brown or silver or black ended up red.
And a lot of classic Porsches ended up the same way.
I was involved with finding the original spec when this car came about, when the restoration started. And the interesting thing about it was that generally when you find the spec on cars that were delivered new in the 70s, you don't necessarily get the description of the options, but you get the codes. And the first thing I noticed was that the codes went a lot further than your average 75 delivered 911 of any type. You know, you think, let me just check that this really was an Australian car, because this is really not making a hell of a lot of sense. But then, it's an Australian car. It's got the decals, it's got gold wheels, it had sport seats, it had, and you think, wow, this is a really unique specification for any 911 of the period. And the same thing really goes today. This is part of what we were talking about. There's a conservatism in the way people spec their cars, because they are, as new cars, they're depreciating assets.
Yeah. People might own a car for a couple of years,
yeah,
but they want to be able to sell it at the end of that ownership. But this guy didn't care. He saw all of the options on the page. He's like, I'll have that, I'll have that, I'll have that. And he's ticked just about every box that you can tick on a classic Carrera 2.7. And they had some really cool options. I mean, that safety stripe down the bonnet, you very, very, very rarely have seen that safety stripe up until just very recently. Yeah. But it was a cool option at the time. The Carrera script down the side, you could get that on a Carrera 2.7 either with Porsche or Carrera, and you could get it in a number of different colours, black being the most obvious colour choice at the time, but you could spec it in gold. And the gold wheels in the Carrera script is actually more recognisable with the 3 litre RS, which was the competition version of this car. So it gives it that sort of even more racy look because it was more recognised on the competition car. What I love doing is bringing back the original specifications of the car, all of those minute details that the factory did, the way they painted things, the way they assembled things, how it was put together.
One of the first things that struck me as a really bananas kind of completeness, a detail which nobody would ever see in a finished car. I remember seeing a freshly painted shell that had come back from the painter, which was then being given its semi-gloss black treatment on the interior metalwork surfaces. And before the paint dried, Dave put his initials on the dash panel where the original assemblers would have put their initials at Stuttgart. Dave was doing something that personalised the restoration to a point that if the car was to ever be torn down again, would tell a story about where it's been.
This book in particular is great because it's got a lot of reference photos from the factory of the cars getting built. And that's what I use a lot in my restoration. It might be a picture of the guy painting the car in the factory, but then that gives me straight away, that gives me the angle of the gun, the direction he was moving, all of these little details that make the restoration spot on. Painting the little black strip around the inside of the door where the door card goes. It's one of those little details on Porsche that they did because sometimes the door trims weren't always perfectly trimmed and there was little edges or little gaps, so they'd paint the inside edge of the door where the door trim went to cover up those little things that weren't quite perfect. A lot of hand craftsmanship in these cars. It's what I enjoy about restoring cars, is bringing them back to the way they were, so that people can experience what it was like back in that time to drive these cars. It did exactly what it did when it was brand new, and that is a special experience.
Yeah, completely.